from me somehow. For them to look it up independently is a challenge. So I need to actually relate and respond and respect the different contexts that my students bring, and try to think about how I can actually make those into an advantage. So maybe if you can continue and think about, no, that context that you described, is there a way that you can that situation that you can turn it into an advantage if you can build on that diversity so that all the students would benefit from the exposure to the different contexts?
Thanks, Shishay. I think what you're now picking on is quite interesting, because moving from Marcus to Andrea to now, actually, the thing is that we need to understand our student profile, and it's quite critical. And in addition to the geographical location of urban, rural, there's also the age profile that is changing in our institution. From those that were previously employed looking at UNISA to now a younger cohort coming straight from grade 12 schooling system into the university. So those dynamics also adds to the mix, and I think that's actually quite interesting, the way you highlight the importance of the student profile amidst thinking of signature pedagogies itself. I see Suri Naidu has a question. Suri.
Thank you, Denzel. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the informative presentation. What I gathered from this whole presentation, colleagues, is that when we're looking at hybrid education, it is something that is emerging. And I'm going to use an analogy with the coronavirus, because something negative about the mutations and the different ways in which it is emerging is something that can give us food for thought regarding our approach to hybrid education, because it will be basically a kind of experimentation with different factors to attribute towards our selection of practices there. And therefore, I think what is coming off quite clearly, there's no fixed rule about what hybrid education. It depends on context, student profile, and content, and how we put into practice to challenge this diversity of students that we find at UNISA, and to design a curriculum that is multiculturally responsive, which is a huge task at hand. So it's an ongoing thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very valuable comment, and I also see the comments are coming in the chat. And I think that one of the things that, and this is a kind of a tension that is created by hybridization, but in a way, I think it's positive in the sense that if I would go into a lecture hall and I would see 500 students sitting before me, and they will all have their notebooks on their tables before them, I just see them all as a singular identity. They are all students. They're in my class, they're students, that's all I care. Now I suddenly realize that these students are very different. They're, like I said, some of them come from, some of them are older, some of them are younger, some of them come from a more modern educational context, some from a more traditional one. Some of them have families, some of them don't. Some of them maybe live still with their parents and so on. And they bring those experiences to the classroom with them. They come from different cultures. You mentioned the multiculturalism, and this is something that in different ways I think South Africa and Israel share. But usually I teach the content. I don't teach the students. Right now, this hybridization suddenly makes me understand that I can't teach the same way to a student that is, a 20-year-old with a broadband and a room of her own, or a 40-year-old who has 3 children running around and they're lucky if they get mobile reception, right? I need to adapt. I need to acknowledge these profiles. And one of the things that come up here is how can we get a picture of our students' profile, students' demography, and perhaps, and I think, it's, Tabitha says, the first exercise are supposed to be introduction, knowing your students. So actually you build that into the course itself. So you say, okay, I, for instance, I give them an exercise. I say, I want you, again, looking at that example of teaching the teacher as a researcher. Instead of me delivering content to them, I say, okay, think about what would research be in your context and give me an example from your context. And through that, I can get a glimpse into their life, but also they get a glimpse into each other's life. So I turn this diversity into an asset. Okay, so maybe we'll continue, if you don't mind, with the presentation, so that hopefully we'll have time for a few more questions later on. So yes, well, again, we were talking about values for hybrid education. We didn't really make a lot of headway in terms of, I asked you for if you can propose some values for hybrid education, and we didn't really get much out of that, which is fine. So, maybe education wants to organize the world, make it universally accessible. Well, no, that's what Google does. Maybe we want to share, give people the power to share and make the world open and connected. Remember, Andrea talked about openness, but actually that's really the vision statement of Facebook. I'm not sure that they actually live up to it, but at least that's what they claim. Maybe we want to provide people with a destination for creativity, learning, and free expression, and to participate in a global exchange of ideas. Again, that's YouTube's mission statement. And the reason I mention these things is, again, we need to reconceptualize our role as educators. We are no longer in the business of providing access to information or delivering information, because people have, and of course the access, there are huge gaps in access between people, again, from different demographics, from different geographies, and so on. But generally, we live in an open world where access to knowledge is no longer gated by the universities. So we need to think of new values which drive us. We also need to think about the job market, right? This is from the World Economic Forum Future of Jobs survey. And if you see, by 2025, we see that so the stronger lines are the situation today, and then the lighter lines are the situation predicted for 2025. So the question is, how much would be done by machines and how much would be done by humans? And you see that more and more information data processing is shifting from humans to machines. Looking and searching for information shifting from humans to machines, and so on. Only coordinating, developing, managing, advising remains by and large controlled by humans, and even there machines are taking over. So we need to prepare the students from a world that's changing. And although in some places this change would be faster, still this is a world we're looking at. If we're looking at what employers see as important in their workers, they're looking for critical thinking, analysis, problem solving, self-management, people working, and so on, less and less for physical abilities. So all these things are things that we need to then encapsulate in the values that we put forward for education. We also need to listen to the students themselves, and this is, I'm sure that I shouldn't be talking about the student protests in South Africa, because obviously I'm out of my depth here. But apart from the fees issue, I think, as I understand, there was an issue of the demand for decolonializing the curriculum. And again, that's not just about changing the content of the curriculum. It's about kind of, it's just resensitizing ourselves to a different set of values. And again, I'm not in a position to talk about South Africa, but I can talk about, my own context where we also have our own conflicts and our own tensions and own claims of perhaps colonization. And then a question is, are we actually looking for decolonization or hybridization of trying to find a way where the two cultures can coexist and actually synergize with each other? So this brings me to a set of values which I want to put forward, that education should be connected. It should be connected to my world as a learning. It should promote critical thinking. So education, I want to it enables students to evaluate argument, to challenge the status quo, to think about important issues in their community and bring those into the classroom and feel that the classroom gives them a safe place to question and explore the issues that concern them, and to encourage them and to enable them to think about how they make their world better, to give them the belief that they can have the capacity to make the world better, and finally to follow to build their own arsenal of epistemic tools, of epistemic capacity. And again, here that goes back to the issue of decolonization and hybridization, that different cultures bring also different epistemic traditions, and we need to acknowledge these different epistemic traditions. So unfortunately, all the cultures that I draw on are, well, just see that I've put up pictures of 4 white men. So obviously we need to diversify this picture. We need to bring new voices into this discourse and highlight them. And I can actually think of a few people whose pictures should have been here. So although I have Paulo Freire here, who's perhaps at least not a Western male, but still, nevertheless, we're looking at white males. So so perhaps I should add diversity into the set of values that I want to promote. Now, these values are translated into design principles. So once we agree on a set of values, and I challenge you to try to think, what are the values that drive you as an educator and as an educational institution? Then think, okay, how do I translate these values into design principles, i.e. actionable imperatives? For instance, there's a project called the Educational Design Principles Database, and one of the principles there is make thinking visible. So as an educator, I give students opportunities to, say, solve problems or engage in critical discourse, and I give them opportunities to make their thinking visible. And so by making their thinking visible, I enable them to get into the meta epistemic process, to the reflection about their own process of learning, but also I give them an opportunity to have a look into other students' ways of thinking. And so again, that connects to that value of diversity and epistemic diversity and respecting different ways of thinking. Promoting autonomous lifelong learning. So the idea is that my role is not to teach a student content, but to teach them how to learn on their own so that they will be able to continue learning autonomously when they leave the classroom. and in order to do that, I put into the lesson, into the experiences I designed, prompts for planning and monitoring their own learning process. So that relates to the idea of autonomy. And I engage them as critics of what I say, of what other students say, of course, in the respectable discourse. This also relates to the idea of heutagogy and or self-determined learning, where I say, instead of me coming in and saying, okay, this is a curriculum and this is the assessment scheme, so this is how you're going to learn, this is how you're going to test it. I said, let's negotiate that. You came to this course because you found the vision or the prospect of the course interesting and relevant for you. Now tell me what you expect to get out of the course. What do you expect to learn? How do you expect to learn? And how do you want to be assessed? And this sounds like a very radical proposition, and it's not necessarily relevant for every course. I find it hard to think how I'd apply these principles to, say, a first year intro course with 1,000 or 5,000 students. But in some courses, I can definitely turn the ownership of learning over to the students and say, let's negotiate this. Let's think together what is the right way of assessment, given that, for instance, you have to walk 2 days to a place where you'll be able to upload your exam paper, right? So, okay, so let's think together what would be a meaningful way of assessment for you. And in turning that ownership over to the student, I empower them. I also make them really think about their learning process and build their capacity to manage their learning process even after the course is ended. Another set of principles from another paper, for instance, respect learner's zone of possibility. So again, when I design a course, I design it in a flexible way and taking into account that students have different set of opportunities. And so I need to build the course in a way that will be adaptable to what is possible for one student and perhaps not possible for another. I want to support a knowledge building discourse, and that means that I want to give students an opportunity to engage in conversations, whether it's in an assembly format or in smaller groups. So, for instance, these groups could be students from a similar context, which are familiar with the same set of challenges and opportunities and engage in a discourse based on those, or I can have student groups from different backgrounds, different contexts, where they can compare the challenges and opportunities that they face. The 50-50 partnership idea here relates to the integration and use of technology and artificial intelligence, which is, probably a bridge too far from this talk. Now, the problem with principles is that, they always sound very good, very sensible, but, okay, there's still the what and not the how. We don't know how to implement them. So here is where design patterns become very useful. A design pattern is the idea that comes from architecture, which is the idea is that you package together, you identify a problem in a particular context and then identify a tested method of solution for that problem. Again, we won't get into, I see the time is really running short. So I'll just say we had a workshop a few years ago where we discussed, we were looking for patterns for hybrid education. And this is one of the papers that came out of that workshop, and then we had a follow-up workshop with a set of papers there. So if anybody, and a special issue of BJET, if anyone wants to follow up on this, but I'll just give a few examples of design patterns from that kind of line of research. So one of them, for instance, says, the pattern of hybrid learning spaces says, you should create a learning space where you can bring real objects into the virtual space in a digitized form, and also take the digital space into the real world, right? So again, and if you think about the examples that Marcus gave in his talk, or if you think about the Mixit example that I gave in the beginning of this talk, then these are situations where I take something from the real world and bring it into the virtual space, work on it and manipulate it in the virtual space and take it back into the real world. So again, if I tell teachers or students, look, you have a mobile phone with a camera. Now take a picture of the environment in which you learn and upload it to a shared space, to whether it's a Padlet or Snapgrid or any other kind of shared space. And suddenly I can then use that as a background in my lecture, right? And so I mix between the students' real world space and the virtual space and my real world space, right? And create those fascinating, surprising connections. Another pattern what we call multiple learning path. And so we say students come from very different situation, very different context. So what I define as a sort of the canonical path through the course might not work for different students. And so what I want to do is actually to define the objectives of the course, whether in myself or in negotiation with the students, and then think about different paths which allow different students, depending on the context in which they come, to arrive to those objectives. And again, one student, I mean, HyFlex is an example of that. One student would come to class and participate in a live discussion. Another student would interact with a course online asynchronously, and so they would interact through a forum rather than through a live discussion. But they will both have different paths at arriving at the same objectives. Show the process. So again, the idea of giving opportunities for students to show not just the product of the work, but also the process behind it. And when we're talking about understanding the profile of the student, understanding the situations in which they are studying and participating in the course, if we give them an opportunity, for instance, whether it's in terms of sharing drafts, of taking photographs or video of the process by which they produce the products which they submit to the course, we get an insight into their own life, and we give them the opportunity to sort of celebrate their own life and also reflect on it. And last, the idea of what we call cross-teaching. So the idea is that, we have the same course, if I was teaching a course of teachers as researchers in Tel Aviv or in South Africa or in Denmark, the course would be different. And so what we could do is we can find a trio of teachers. I will teach one lesson in your course, you would teach one lesson in mine, and we would both teach one lesson in the third colleague's course in Denmark. And we give then each other an opportunity to get a glimpse into the same ideas, the same concepts, but from a different perspective. So I think I'll stop here. So perhaps that gives us just 2 or 3 minutes to discuss, just so you see the context in which I'm talking to you, right? So when I give a talk, I always prefer to do it standing up because I think I speak better this way. So this is the way I set up my living room in order to be able to talk to you. So, thank you very much. And again, I'll stop sharing now, so we can open up for. Oh, it's wonderful to see. Yeah, some Rob Hubert is outside. It looks like a lovely day over there. Where are you exactly? Hubert, you're muted.
I think he's still mute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, sorry. I'm Denzi, I'm not sure, how long we have, but
we can open up for a few questions, colleagues. So you're welcome to raise your hands, and then we can engage Yeshe with some of the questions. Yeshe, thank you very much for. I think you actually kept this day up quite nicely. In a sense that we get back to repositioning the students at the center of some of our developments. I kind of like that approach because one of the things that we at UNISA move towards a much more learner-centered approach, and you've actually captured that quite well with some of the elements of the diversity of our students. And you can imagine how critical this is, especially with a university like UNISA, where scalability is a critical problem. We've got thousands of students in some modules, and then you've got modules that are much smaller. So you've got this diversity across, and I see there's a lot of curriculum development specialists here on the panel on our platform. So they would actually attest to some of these elements as well. Is the challenges of how we actually design for those diversity. Colleagues, please just raise your hand so we can engage Yeshe. And Yeshe, I think for me personally, those values of connected critical thinking, the empowered, the epistemologies, is something that we really need to rethink and reposition ourselves at the institution as well. So thank you very much for that. Colleagues, any questions from your side? I see there's some comments in the some positive comments in the chat. Salosh, I see you made a comment on design principle.
Yes, Denzel. What I wanted to add is actually the design principle on making thinking visible. It aligns very well with assessment for learning, and assessment for learning is one of the strategic objectives for UNISA. And what I liked about it is we do not only look at what the end product of what the student presents, allowing the students to make the thinking visible. Like within the context of UNISA, it actually, provides opportunities for students to engage more deeply with the peer assessment part of it. So for me, that stood out quite strong. And what I also want to just add there is when you actually use this design principle of making thinking visible, it's good to accompany a rubric so that you can guide your peers or guide your students on what are the critical points that they should be looking for in the students' thinking. Thank you for that.
Absolutely so. I think, first of all, and this connects to an ongoing conversation I'm having with Denzel about, for me, assessment is the cornerstone of learning design. So I actually promote an approach which I call assessment-driven learning design. So idea is that you define your learning objectives, and you characterize your student personas, and then say, right, if these are my objectives and for these students and these circumstances, how will I know that they attain these objectives? From that, you derive your assessment schema. And then you plan all your learning based to how will I make sure that they then succeed in this assessment. And you're right, assessment is not just a measurement of learning. It's a driver of learning. It's also if you build your assessment scheme right, then it becomes essentially an integral part of the learning process. And there's wonderful work, for instance, by Robert Bjork about how, in a way, a lot of times when you do a quiz, for instance, which is a very crude assessment tool, you can learn from that, in fact, more than by simply reviewing the content over and over again, because the assessment forces you to retrieve information and to check your knowledge in yourself. So definitely that's very, very important. Rubrics are very important, very powerful tool. One of the, again, tricks that I tried in some of my courses, of course, with 5,000 students, it's trickier to do, but it's actually ask students to build their own rubrics. So I tell the student, okay, you're going to, we agree on this curriculum. Now think of a rubric that for you will indicate that you've learned what you've set out to learn. And it's very challenging because it requires them to really plan their learning process at a very high level. Obviously, if you want to use self-assessment, peer assessment, then providing a good rubric is really, it's the key to success or to failure. So if you just tell students, okay, review each other's work, but they have no way of assessing their peers' work, then you might end up with an experience which is both ineffective and frustrating. But if you say, this is how I want you to evaluate your work or your peers' work, then it becomes a very powerful tool for learning. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Yeshe. I can see there's very positive comments on the chat. You've really opened up and challenged a lot of the mindsets of our colleagues with this presentation, and especially the kind of rethinking outside the box. And I mean, the kind of concept that you pushed out, and I think that was one of the issues that we wanted, was to challenge the mindsets, to move us beyond the traditional norm of how we see UNISA and how we do UNISA, and how we do education in South Africa itself, to now really thinking critically about moving beyond that space and innovating a bit. So thank you very much for that, Yeshe. We really appreciate it. And I know this was also a bit late, but you've actually just joined us and you've impressed all the colleagues. And colleagues, I must also say that Yeshe will be hosting a workshop similar to Andrea, a workshop for us, and we will market that workshop in due course. I'm just trying to fit this into Yeshe's calendar so that it gives us the time that we need, and we will then market it. And then, as I said previously, as soon as we send the invites out, colleagues, it'll be also a 50-50 member workshop, with the idea that when we do these workshops, we want a bit more interactivity, a bit more engaged, so that we can actually be a bit more productive, and we'll use the technology to facilitate this. So look out for Yeshe's workshop, and also look out for Andrea's workshop that are upcoming. So once again, thank you very much, Yeshe. Thank you, colleagues, for joining us today. But let me officially ask Dr. Lydia Mbati to do the vote of thanks for us before I then close. Dr. Lydia Mbati.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much, Denzel. Now, I would like to, on behalf of the portfolio teaching, learning, community engagement, and student support, as well as the department tuition support and facilitation of learning, I would like to pass my thanks to, first of all, the presenters, Professor Marcus Specht, who gave a very inspiring presentation on the role of mobile devices with built-in capabilities and what they can do in terms of teaching, as well as seamless, personalized, distributed, and situated learning. Thank you very much for your talk, Professor Specht. Also, I'd also like to thank Dr. Dos Santos, who spoke about OERs and the open movement in particular. And this was a very comprehensive conceptualization of the open movement. And it has also stimulated a lot of thought on our part as as I speak for myself, and I'm sure many of the audience may find this quite true also from their perspective, is our understanding of the open movement, I believe, was quite narrow. I think she really opened up the understanding of the various aspects of the open movement. And thank you very much for that presentation. And last but not least, of course, Dr. Yishe Moore, who spoke about the hybrid education movement. And what he really demonstrated is the relatedness between the three presentations that we heard, because you could see aspects of the mobile movement as well as the open movement in his own presentation. And I'd like to thank the speakers, because not only did they advance our thinking, but also have opened opportunities for us to think of ways in which we can improve our practices. And particularly starting now, we don't have to wait until there's another pandemic to think about these things. I think these topics that were spoken about and the presentations that were made, we should find ways in which we can start adapting our thinking and our practices as well. Thank you very much for your presentations. I'd also like to thank you, our audience. Of course, without your presence here, we wouldn't have been able to have these presentations. We have audience members from within UNISA, from across South Africa and internationally as well. Thank you very much for joining us. And we do hope that you'll be able to join us for our other series and events that we'll be having throughout the course of this year. Thank you very much indeed. Last but not least, I'd like to thank the people behind the scenes who worked to put this together, those from the marketing and also from the technical side who made this event possible. And as I conclude in my vote of thanks, I also want to thank the speakers for accepting to come and present at very short notice, like Denzel alluded to. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you at our upcoming events. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia. And colleagues, once again, thank you to Marcus, Andrea, and Yeshe. You all have been amazing. I mean, you've left us with so much of food for thought. It's a pity that, with COVID, that we can't actually bring you down, or else we would have brought you down and we would have kept you probably for a week with us just to engage us a bit more further. But this is a start to, I think, much more exciting collaborations ahead of us. And I've received so much of positive comments and feedback that we really need to bring three of you all back again so that you can have a bit more extensive engagements with us. So thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Yeshe. Marcus has left earlier. We appreciate you all so much. And colleagues, thank you for joining us. And as Lydia said, we've had colleagues from UNISA, we've had colleagues from outside of UNISA that somehow heard this and jumped on board. And we've also had a few international colleagues with us as well. So thank you very much for all joining us. This is officially the launch of our Innovation and Teaching and Learning series, and you've made it remarkable. So we look forward to much more. And please watch the space for the upcoming workshop with Andrea and the upcoming workshop with Yeshe. And from my side, just once again, thank you to the team. Thank you to Richard in the background for coordinating and providing the technical support. Prof. Mashile is not here with us. He's actually jumped in from a Senate tuition meeting and he's gone back to the meeting. But thanks, note of appreciation to him as well. So thank you, colleagues. And just last but not least, good afternoon to all of you and wish you your best for the rest of the day and whatever you have for the rest of the week. Thank you very much, colleagues. Appreciate it. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Yeshe.